Welcome to Locally Sourced. I'm Armanda Familetti. You do not have to be Bill Gates to be a philanthropist. My guest tonight works for the community foundations of the Hudson Valleys, and she's going to explain to us how anyone, individuals, churches, nonprofit organizations, businesses, can give to their favorite charities through the charitable foundations of the Hudson Valley. It's a mouthful. And here's my guest, Nancy Rossi-Brownell. Nancy, thanks for coming.
Armanda, thank you for having me here this evening. It is a mouthful, and we do a lot. So the mouthful is significant to what we do. Interestingly, a lot of people are surprised to hear this. Community foundations started in 1914 in Cleveland, Ohio, because of the forward thinking of a banker named Frederick Goff. He had this revolutionary idea to pool the resources of local philanthropists in order to create a permanent fund that would benefit the city of Cleveland. Today, we actually have over 700 community foundations in the United States and more worldwide. In the United States, we manage about $49 billion in assets, and each year we put out grants in the United States of about $4 billion.
Wow. So community foundations may not be a term that many people are familiar with. They've heard of foundations, they've heard of private foundations, they've heard of nonprofits. Can you kind of tell me how community foundations fit in that picture?
Oh, absolutely. And when I say that community foundations began in 1914, a lot of people are surprised because they say, well, I haven't heard of community foundations. Basically, what community foundations do is we work with donors, and as you mentioned, donors of all types of means that have a charitable interest. We manage funds for these donors in the same way that your manager may manage your retirement account. Your retirement account is managed with the goal of supporting building assets and supporting you when you are maybe no longer taking a paycheck each year. We manage funds for donors with the goal of growing those assets in order to support that they can support their charitable goals forever. Compared to a private foundation, there are many benefits, but one of the biggest benefits is the simplification and the ease and it's a much less costly way to become a charitably minded person into perpetuity. And we also, compared to other types of foundations, we are an umbrella organization. Your charitable giving is not geared directly towards one type of giving. It can be geared towards any of a variety of different interests.
That's very interesting. So the name of the organization is Community Foundations of the Hudson Valley. Community Foundations. So that means there's more than one. So tell me about how that works. I understand there's one in Dutchess, there's one in Putnam, and one in Ulster?
Well, actually, those are affiliates of ours. We are one organization, the Community Foundations of the Hudson Valley, which actually started in the Poughkeepsie area many years ago in a similar way to the way Community Foundations started overall. A group of philanthropists in Poughkeepsie decided they would pool their resources in order to meet the unique needs of the Poughkeepsie area. Over time, the fund grew, as did our service area. So in 1995, we became the Community Foundations of Dutchess County. After that, in 2005, we added Ulster to our service area, and most recently, Putnam County as the Community Foundations of the Hudson Valley. While there are unique needs in all three communities and funds that are uniquely directed specifically to different counties through our community grants program, we are overall Community Foundations of the Hudson Valley.
Okay. And you specifically work for the Putnam Foundation.
Yes, I do.
And what is your title there?
I'm Vice President of Putnam.
Okay. And how long has the affiliate in Putnam been working?
Well, actually, it's an interesting story with the history of Putnam. We established the DBA several years ago, but we really did not get going.
Doing business as?
Doing business as. The affiliates are all DBAs of the Community Foundations of the Hudson Valley. But we really got going when the Dyson Foundation had the forward thinking and agreed with us that Putnam County needed a resource like us. They gave us a $100,000 challenge grant and several years to meet this challenge. And the goal of the grant was to build philanthropy and interest in what we're doing in Putnam, but also to ultimately set up a fund that is by and for the people of Putnam. Any donations that go into this community fund from Putnam County residents go back into Putnam County to nonprofits. So the Dyson Foundation very generously gave us quite a few years to achieve this, but we did it 2.5 years ahead of the deadline because Putnam County is a generous county.
Okay.
And because of that, we were able to open up community grants to nonprofits here in Putnam County last year, and they're actually opened up again right now this year. If you go to our website, you can find those grants under Receive, Grants, Nonprofit Capacity Building.
Right. So, so in other words, it's, as I understand it, you talked about pooling funds. So, of course, if you're going to pool your funds with others, even though you only have $5,000 yourself, or, you know, to a lot of people that's a lot of money, but if it's your family who's contributing $5,000, then it makes it a little easier. That's part of the community foundations. You can have more impact when you pool your funds, right? So,
well, there's a couple different ways you can look at it. You have the $5,000 fund has the gift of being invested with a fund that is now over $60 million. So you can be much more diversified with a fund that size than you would be just investing $5,000 yourself. But we do have pooled resource funds. One is our Hudson Valley Farm Fresh Grant Program, which we have funding from several different resources in order to try to address the issues of food insecurity in the Hudson Valley. I did not mention, actually, our Fund for Education grants, which are smaller funds that were pooled together. They were funds that were interested in supporting education in the Hudson Valley area, but individually each of these funds wouldn't have had the impact that as a pooled resource they do. And then the community funds I just mentioned are actually, we fundraise for those through our annual garden party, and also through yearly fundraising at the end of the year and that kind of thing, in order to create a fund, basically donations pooled by a community, in this case Putnam County, to benefit Putnam County at large and the nonprofit community.
wow, that's terrific. About how much money have you dispersed in Putnam County since it started?
Well, in Putnam County, actually, we've had funds that were interested in serving Putnam County prior to us having the Putnam County Community Foundation, but overall, we've distributed over $500,000 in Putnam County.
Wow, that's terrific. In just 3 years, 4 years?
Well, some of that goes back to these funds that were already serving Putnam County.
Okay, all right. So that's terrific. So as far as Putnam County goes, let's talk about what who gets the benefit of these funds. So you have initiatives and they fund capacity building for nonprofits, but you also offer the residents an opportunity to establish their own funds, or businesses or nonprofits or families to establish their own funds as if they had their own small private foundation that they don't have to worry about, they don't have to administer, because they have the professionals at the community foundations of Hudson Valley to do it for them.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's how it works. So it's not just the nonprofits that are benefiting, but really it's all the residents who want to be charitable and be smart about their charitable giving. When we talked before the show, you told me a story that was very disturbing, but probably quite frequent, about the woman who received solicitations in the mail and gave to a veterans organization. Can you talk a little bit more about that story?
Absolutely. This is something, a service that we offer, which really distinguishes us from other places where you could open up a donor-advised fund or a designated fund. We are local, and we work directly with our donors by vetting nonprofit organizations for them, by doing research and consulting with our donors. Some donors come in and know exactly where they want their funding to go. Other donors change it up year to year. Their interests may change, their focus may change, or like the woman you're talking about, she had a fund, she's an older woman, and she was giving to all of these different organizations by writing checks out and not utilizing her fund. So in working with her, and she was getting to a point where she's tired of all of the phone calls and all of the mail, and she doesn't get email, but if she did, that would be a full mailbox as well. And we discussed, you have this fund, why don't you decide where you want your charitable giving to go every year, and you can change it up because it's a donor-advised fund, And we will help make this simple for you. So when you get that phone call, you can say, I do my giving through the community foundations of the Hudson Valley, through my fund there.
Oh, that's great.
And so she gave me a list, and most of the organizations were well known. I frankly did not have to do a lot of research because I knew them. But there was this particular veterans organization I didn't. I researched this organization and found out that most of the donations they were getting per year were going towards executive salaries. This was not what her goal was. And so I had this conversation with her, and she said, oh, absolutely not. That's not, I wanted it to help the veterans. So what we did is worked with this donor to find an organization that met the goal she had. She herself is a veteran, met the goal she had for helping out veterans, and found another organization that was a much better match.
Right. So we all get lots of solicitations in the mail, and we see a compelling story in a letter, and our heart is touched, and we write a check without doing our homework as to whether or not that nonprofit is really doing the job we want to fund. And so the great part about having a fund at the Community Foundation is that you don't have to worry so much about that. Other people are vetting those organizations, and they're making sure that the money, your hard-earned money that's in the fund, is going to the charity and doing the most good at that charity rather than going to executive salaries. Because unfortunately, although the majority of nonprofits are above board and they're run by people with the right intentions, some of them are pretty close to scams. And it sounds to me like that veterans organization that that person wanted to fund was actually close to a scam, even though they barely fit the parameters of being a legitimate nonprofit organization.
Absolutely, and unfortunately we have the resources and the ability to vet these organizations, and again, we just off the top of our heads have the knowledge from years of doing this. But I mean, right now with what's going on in Houston, how many warnings have there been about be careful about, your heart is breaking for these people, you want to help, but you want to really help. You don't want to line the pockets of somebody who's trying to take advantage of you. We can make sure that the money you have intended to go to charitable giving is doing the right thing for you.
Right, and you had said that she had already set up a fund. So she already had money in a fund, but she was also writing checks out of her own checking account when she saw solicitations that touched her heart. So to me, it just seems like there's such a value in having a community foundation and the professionals there. You give them a list of who you want to give your funds to, or you tell them the different areas that you want to fund, education, animal welfare, health, whatever. You can fund organizations within the community, right?
Yes.
And you can fund national organizations
Absolutely.
as well. So if you're a regular contributor to the National Wildlife Fund or something, you just tell the Community Foundation, I want to send $200, $300 to them annually, and it's taken care of.
Absolutely. You recommend where you want your grants to go. Unless something is totally out of the parameters of a charity, or we see a red flag that we think we should be having a conversation with the donor, that recommendation is made very easily online. It really just takes a few minutes. If somebody's not online, there's other ways to do it, faxing, phone calls. I mean, we are very flexible in working with our donors.
So let's talk about establishing a fund. We've talked about someone who has a fund. I said at the beginning that individuals, families, businesses, nonprofit organizations can establish funds. What does it mean to establish a fund?
Well, first off, it's simple, and that's one of the things I think that surprises people a lot. It also, people are, as you mentioned, surprised about how accessible it is to many individuals in our community of all different types of means. But what you do is you contact our office. I'm out on the road all the time. I prefer to come sit down with you and discuss the fund with you in person. If that's not available to the individual, we can do it over the phone. We set up the parameters of the contract and the type of funds you want to have, and there's several different types of funds for donors. The donor advised fund, which gives you the ability to choose the recommendations for grants you want to make each year, and it can change up. A designated fund, which could be set up with specific charities in mind, or even specific areas, both geographic and areas of interest. For example, somebody could set up a fund and say, I want my grant making to go to nonprofits who serve Putnam County. or I want my grant making to go to nonprofits that serve the arts community. So we set up those parameters. There are choices about whether, I won't get into all the specifics, but if anybody wants to talk to me, they can. It gets a little complicated. But as to whether you want principal access, if you're creating an endowed fund, different types of investment pools that you may choose to be in. But basically, those are very simple decisions to make. You sign the contract, we establish the fund. The fund can be set up in many flexible ways. Of course, cash, stock transfers, rollovers from IRAs, as far as designated funds. Even we take a variety of creative assets.
Yeah, well, actually, here's a graphic that kind of explains the whole progression of donor-advised funds. So can you explain what we're seeing on the screen?
Absolutely. This really simplifies it, but it's people try to complicate it more than it is. It's much simpler than you think. A donor decides to create, in this case, a donor-advised fund, but a designated fund would fall into this category, except on the grant making. You decide what types of assets you want to give to establish your fund. Your fund is established. Your fund is established with an investment organization that invests your fund so that it will grow, so that it will be able to support the charities that you are interested in into perpetuity. We have an amazing investment committee. We work with asset managers who have really done a lot for our donors as far as growth. Each year there is a payout that is established by our board. You choose with that payout how you would like to grant or gift your assets or your payout to any of a variety of nonprofits. And as we mentioned, it could be local, which a lot of our donors do choose to keep it local, but it could also be on a national basis.
Right, it just has to be a 501c3,
right,
basically.
Or a lot of people do donate to their colleges, to their parishes or churches, but generally something that is set up for charitable reasons.
Yeah. Well, with the stock market booming, I think you said that it doesn't have to be cash transfer from your checking account to the foundation.
Correct.
It can be a transfer of stock. So if you have a stock that's doing really well, good for you, but you might want to just transfer that stock straight to the foundation. You don't pay any estate taxes, right? Or, what's the word I'm looking for? Long-term taxes.
The tax benefit you get is in the year that you make the investment to set up the fund, or in any year that you're making gifts. But yes, it does protect you from taxes as far. And
you can't think of the name of the taxes
either. For some reason. That's terrible.
I'll have to do a show on taxes.
Yes.
So that's terrific. So you can balance your portfolio of stocks and do a tremendous amount of good at the same time.
Absolutely.
Because you can establish this fund. And we also talked about individuals, families, businesses, nonprofits. Tell me, how would that work if my family, for example, wanted to establish this little family fund, and that everyone in our family would have an opportunity to use the funds there to give to their charities? How would that work? Can you do that?
Yes, we do have family funds. Generally, there is a primary donor advisor on the fund, but a lot of families sit down, and actually a lot of people use funds as a way to shepherd the next generation or even the following generation, grandchildren, into the charitable world. They sit down, they make the decisions about where the charitable dollars should go that particular year. They recommend it to the community foundation, and it's done.
It's a great way to teach your children how to be charitable.
Absolutely.
Right? And to pass on a fund of money that when you pass on, they're going to continue to make grants from.
Absolutely.
Or make donations
you
from.
can name successor advisors, and many people do name their children as their successor advisors. And the children, when something happens, the people that started the fund pass, have an idea of the direction of the original founders of this fund.
Right. And also, this is kind of a morbid subject, but for those of us, loved ones who have passed and had a particular interest, for example, animal welfare or education, their successors can start a fund in their name, a memorial fund.
Absolutely.
For them, so that what they were interested in, which what they were giving to in their lifetime can continue through this memorial fund. Correct?
Absolutely.
That's a great way to honor someone who's passed on and
It really
has been
is.
charitable in the community.
Absolutely, and it's a great way to protect our community because so many nonprofits, they're smart enough to not only depend on grants from particular donors, but the support they've received all those years, it can be very painful when the support stops.
Right.
So it's nice for the next generation if the people who had passed away hadn't established a fund to do something like that in honor of them.
So we've talked a lot about what you do for individuals who want to be charitable, who want to be their own little mini-sized Bill Gates and have their own foundations. What about the nonprofits in the community? You have ways of supporting them outside of the funds, right?
Absolutely. As you just mentioned, we do offer financial support through our donors, but also through these pooled resource funds and the unrestricted community funds I mentioned before. But we offer support as far as education and workshops for our nonprofits. We work with nonprofit boards, particularly on areas that are a little bit difficult for staff or executives on the board to discuss, like planned giving and succession planning. We also work with our nonprofits by connecting them to create solutions. An example would be last summer we had a workshop day for both funders, interested parties, nonprofits on hunger in the Hudson Valley, which is obviously an immediate need here. And at the end of the day, we had a roundtable kind of speed dating type thing between, again, interested parties, food banks, actually not donors in that case, but people that were interested in feeding the people that need it most in our communities. I happened to be sitting at the innovation table, and we had one woman talking to another woman, and they were pretty far apart geographically in the valley, about how sometimes I get way too many iceberg lettuces, and people who run food banks do not want to throw food out.
Right.
And another one says, well, sometimes I don't get iceberg lettuce, but I get too many green peppers. And a farmer said, sometimes I have too many zucchinis, which I think probably is a vegetable that sometimes you have too many of.
And they're too big.
Exactly. And so somebody at the table said, wouldn't it be a great thing if we could connect all of ourselves to share the wealth of the surplus we have and get it to the people who need it? Somebody said, wouldn't it be great if there was an app? Well, some very smart people in my office worked with several local foundations and trusts, and within the next month or so, Feed HV is going to be...
Feed Hudson Valley.
Right, but it's actually HV is the actual app. Feed HV will be launching, and it's going to connect volunteers, donors, food donors, meaning restaurants and farmers generally, and the food banks. We're asking for volunteers. We're trying to keep everything geographically close so the food doesn't have to travel far and it's not a burden on volunteers to pick up food from the food donors, deliver it to the food banks, and the food banks will get it to the people who need it most. And that came out of getting nonprofits together to have a discussion about how can we improve the nonprofit landscape in feeding the Hudson Valley.
You know, that's so important because when you're working at a nonprofit, and it's probably a struggle every day, and you're in your own little bubble, it's so important to find out what other nonprofits in your area are doing. So
absolutely.
I'd really encourage that. I'm glad that you convene those people. You mentioned our nonprofits. How, if I'm a nonprofit, do I get to be one of your nonprofits?
Well, there's several ways. First off, just get on our radar screen and I'll put you in our database. So that's very simple. So
now I'm one of your nonprofits.
Yes,
great.
Yes, you are. Contact me. I'm happy to do that. But then by applying for grants through our grants program, which again, if you go on our website, you can read about all the different types of areas that we have grant programs in. And I would recommend even, let's say you're an arts organization, you may not think to look at Health and Human Services. Look at Health and Human Services. We have a fund that has funded AEDs for organizations that have absolutely nothing to do with health and medical services, but that AED is providing a service medically for that organization.
And it's so important to have an AED on place nowadays.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's almost a requirement of any office is to...
Agreed. So I would just recommend take the time and read through all of the grants that are there. It gives you the parameters for the grants, the deadlines. Take a look. So you get to the point you decide to apply for a grant. And of course, before you were already in our database because I put you there, but you apply for a grant, let's say to the community grants, and let's say, goal is to get the grant, but let's say you don't get the grant. we put out a packet twice a year of grants that were not fulfilled through our grant programs because unfortunately we have more requests than we have funds as
always.
usual. And that goes out to our donors. We manage about 500 funds. So your projects and your organization gets in front of our donors. Oftentimes those grants or applications are picked up by our donors, but if not, our donors are getting to know your organization, which is very important.
Right. And I would say hopefully this program is going to help to grow those number of funds.
Right.
So that once people see this, they're going to realize if they're serious about being charitable, and $5,000 is not a lot of money, really. It's especially if you do a stock transfer for some booming stock that you really don't want to pay a tax on by cashing out. Then they can start their own fund. They just need to contact you.
Absolutely.
They can call you. They can email you. They can go to the website.
Sure.
I think we have all that information. We've shown it already.
Terrific.
And you can talk to them and really give them a fuller picture of what's available, more than what this conversation is about.
Absolutely.
Because it really goes deeper than what we've discussed. And the deeper you go, the better it is. So
I agree.
So you can really get a chance to get excited about charities in the area and your own ability to be able to increase the impact of your donations because they're in this larger fund. And also you mentioned, and I just want to touch on it one more time, is that the funds that you put into the community foundations goes into an investment.
Yes.
So it doesn't just sit there, even though interest rates aren't very high right now.
No, it grows.
But professional
That's the ultimate
investors,
goal.
right? Professional investors are actually looking at your money and helping it grow, so that you have more funds to give away every year.
That's right.
Nancy, 28 minutes goes pretty quickly.
It does.
So I want to thank you so much for coming.
Well,
You've just been a wealth of information. I encourage people who are watching to go on your website, learn more about the community foundations of the Hudson Valley. All you Putnam folks, make sure that you go on there too, so we can keep our wonderful Putnam nonprofits functioning. And thanks very much for this very talented and loyal crew who come every Monday or whatever day it is and do their great job for us here at Locally Sourced. Thanks.